my God, I couldn't believe the pictures, how alert she was. She didn't even look like a newborn. It was crazy, but it could be because of the cesarean, you know. I think they do better if you don't give the vaginal delivery.
If I was a good person,
Mhm.
I would remember how Michael was.
Yeah, you don't even know.
Absolute blank.
Yeah, I know. Uh, David was only 5'12". I had no problems with him but morning sickness the whole 9 months.
Bill, hi.
Franny was
Hi, I'm trying to mute everybody.
Yes.
This is the thing that we have at noon.
worse than me.
Good question.
Yeah.
Well,
Good morning.
Hello. Let me see.
I don't see our guest.
No, I don't either. I'm going to shut this shade. Better.
So you're able to mute people.
Yeah, I just have mute all, but allow people to unmute themselves.
Yeah, okay, good. I think that's probably good.
And I need Noah to come on to,
There he is.
because I created the event. I have to shift.
I'm here.
Oh, you're here.
Hey,
So
Noah.
how do I shift hosting to you?
Hi, Noah.
No, you're not shifting hosting to me.
Okay, what am I doing?
Okay. Do you see, hover over my image.
Okay,
And then you see the 3 dots.
It just says mute or more.
Yeah, more.
Okay.
Make
Oh,
me
it says make co-host?
co-host.
I just did. Okay. Yes. Okay, so I just did that. Now what do I do?
1 second. Now you want to make Adam, Sam, and Valerie also co-host. Oh, look at Howard and his scrubs.
Oh, good.
Howard.
Howard's on. So
Oh,
Howard,
yeah.
you're gonna back me up.
I know Howard's seeing patients. I think it's in the background.
Oh, so I can't count on him. Who else is helping
No,
me?
you can't count on me because I'm not able to do the.
Okay, but who else did you tell me besides Howard?
Wait, who else? Oh, wait.
Oh, look. Hi, Sharona.
Valerie, let me make you.
Hey, Howard, why don't you put it on in the chemo room so we'll get a little entertainment?
Oh,
Yeah.
no. Oh.
All right, so wait a minute. I did Valerie and Adam, and should I do Sam too?
Yes.
Noah, let's you and I text so that I can know what I need to know, okay?
Sure.
And you're recording already, so you're gonna have to delete this.
No, Jill's recording.
Jill, you started the recording too early.
It starts
Oh.
automatically.
It starts, yeah.
Hi, Valerie.
Oh, hi, Sherry.
How are you, ladies?
No,
Who else is on right now? Oh, not all
where are you in
ladies.
Michigan?
Sorry?
Good morning, everyone.
I said, where are you in Michigan?
I live in Lansing.
Oh, all right. I was going to ask you, my order from Zingerman's has been late. I was going to ask you if you go pick it up for me.
Is our speaker on yet?
No, I don't see him.
Oh, Ben's on. Hi, Ben.
Still a little early.
Good morning, Noah. Good morning, everybody.
Hi, Ben.
Martin.
Is Martin on?
He just got on.
Or let me make him, so I'll do that for him too.
Yep, I'm on.
No, I made him a co-host too, since he's one of the.
And you have to bend the bill on your house down a little bit. That style of the flat bill is,
This?
yeah, you have to.
Joe,
bend
your
it.
name needs to be
Yeah,
changed.
like that. Right. All right. All right, Martin. Here you go.
How about this?
Martin is
Bert?
being a little more 21st century. Come on, Bert.
I know. Well, yeah, but I've known Martin a long time. I'm wearing one that says "Jews for Biden." See, it's a little one, but
Oh, yeah, I see that.
Bert and
Noah,
I are-
are
Bert and
there,
I
are there
acquaintances.
other participants in the waiting room right now? I mean, are there other participants waiting to log on, or is everybody joining automatically?
People are joining automatically.
Jill, you should change your name.
Yeah, change your name, Joe.
It says Jews for Biden.
Okay, let me change it. Hold on.
you know.
Oh, all right. That's your
At least your name isn't Noah Arpit.
Now it's
Yeah.
That's it, Martin. I was just got an email from Larry. We were sharing our memories of Ebbets Field and the Brooklyn Dodgers.
There he is.
Oh, Bill's on.
Hi, Bill. Bill,
He's on mute.
muted.
He's muted.
Hi, Adam.
how are you?
Fine.
Thanks
How
for
are you?
joining us.
Jill, you're gonna want to make Bill a co-host.
Yeah, let me do that right now.
Just waiting through the technical stuff.
Okay.
There we go. All good.
Hi, Bill. Jill Zippin.
Hey, Jill. How are you?
Good. I chair Democratic Jewish Outreach Pennsylvania, which Adam is a part of.
Right, and
Excellent.
there's Martin Raffel and Sam Edelman will be doing the questioning.
Okay, good.
Hi, Bill.
And Noah Arbitz on the call.
Yeah,
He
there's
chairs
Noah.
the
There's
Michigan
Noah.
Jewish Democratic Caucus.
Hi, Bill.
And
Nice to meet
Valerie Habib chairs the Atlanta Democratic Jewish Women's Salon. Did I get that right?
Close, Jewish Democratic Women's Salon. But close.
Okay.
By the way, everybody should be interested in it. I just got something I haven't read yet. Haaretz says a piece about why ultra-Orthodox Jews love Donald Trump. It should make it for an interesting read.
Hi,
You see
Joni.
Haaretz right now.
All right.
We're just going to, I think
I've
we'll wait
got a
until
few
about
minutes.
12:02
Early.
we're going to start.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, it's not even 12 yet. And
Yeah, I think there's 240 signups. So.
How are things in Pennsylvania?
So far, so good.
Nerve-wracking.
I'm not concerned so much about Biden winning the state. I'm concerned what happens post-election with the litigation
Yeah.
and what Trump is going to try to do with regard to our mail-in voting. I think he's going to challenge it.
Pennsylvania is one of the messier states. I mean, we looked at this in some detail, obviously, and yeah, Pennsylvania is one of the messier states because it's so unused to mail-in. But you
Right.
won the court case. They won the court case last night. That
yeah,
was,
they did. Yeah,
Right,
so
which is
they
really good.
count them a couple of extra days, which is good. You know.
Right, because if for some reason we don't win Florida, we're going to need Arizona and Pennsylvania.
We're gonna win. What do I keep telling you? You know what?
Okay.
What the national anthem of Israel is hope. Hatikva. Remember, you have to hope.
To be a distant cousin or something, and their whole family thinks she's nuts.
Joining on.
Here.
So Jill,
Ira's on.
200?
Yeah, around 237, I believe, signed up, something like that.
All right.
Ira Sheskin's on. Where's Ira?
Oh, it's climbing. The numbers are climbing.
Oh, there he is.
56 and rising.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bill, I may be one of the few people on here who's old enough to remember enjoying reading your dad.
that's good.
I'm
That's
one of
good.
them.
You don't have to be. You don't have to be that old, you know.
Well, I'm 77, so as a matter of fact, I had an uncle who claims to have known him and Irving Howe in college.
Oh, it's CCNY.
CCNY. Yep.
Well,
The
that was
College of Irvings, he called it.
there were a lot of distinguished people in that, or people who went out to pretty good careers in those.
Yeah,
in those,
exactly. And
those years at CCNY.
My uncle was an observer, but he said it was fascinating listening to these.
What was
guys.
his name?
Well, Irv Siegel, in fact.
Oh, Siegel. Yeah. Another Irv, yeah.
Irv.
That was I think that was the class of 1940 was my father. And I think
Yeah,
Howard.
yeah, he was a little bit. Yeah, he was a little bit younger. He was,
Yeah.
and then he went. Then he went into the Navy from there.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
That must have been very heady days for those guys. So,
I mean, can you imagine war, the war's breaking out and all this, the depression, it was pretty unusual. I mean, it's amazing they all mostly made it through and I don't know, kept their sanity mostly. Yeah.
When did your dad pass away?
2009.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember. I did
My
remember.
mom just last year, so yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
But yeah, no, it's okay. She was quite old. She was 97, but
Oh, fine.
my dad was 89. Yeah. Yeah, good run.
Bill, we all got a kick out of your video with Billy Kristol.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
Yes.
That appeals to this demographic, I would say. That's
Yeah.
I know I asked the young people in our office, when it came out, what they thought of it. Of course, like they were polite, but most of them were not really very aware of Billy Kristol or who they kind of knew he had once been important.
Now, I really feel old.
Yeah. No, me too. I mean, he's
I feel
like,
very
I remember the
attacked.
dad, and they don't remember Billy Kristol.
That's really.
I feel
I know,
very
it's-
attacked.
I remember Billy Kristol from Soap, if anybody remembers that.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, the best show. Love that show.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'd
I love
forgotten
that
that he was,
show, too.
I mean, I chatted with him off the air and I had forgotten he was a TV guy before really he became a big Hollywood guy.
Right, because that's how he originally got famous, was Soap, which was very, for its time, risque. Like
Yes, well,
very-
that was, I guess, I don't really remember, but that's, I guess, what its thing was. Its selling point was that it was the most risque,
Right. I think he
network,
played
prime time. So,
Right, I think he played a gay character, and it was like very
Yeah.
risque for the time.
Like it
That
was late
was-
70s.
Yeah, late 70s, exactly.
Rob Reiner said that Billy Kristol was a guest. I mean, played a bit part on one All in the Family episode, which Reiner was on as, in the early mid 70s. That's where they first met. And then
Oh,
so
wow.
kind of his career took off, and then he did the big 80s movies when Harry
The
Met Sally.
Blazing Saddle.
Blazing Saddles. And then I guess when Harry Met Sally, which was huge.
Right,
Yes.
right.
So Jill, it's 12:02. Should we start?
Wait just 2 more minutes, just because we're at 107 and I know 200 and some signed. I'll give it 2 more minutes. And then we'll start.
As long as we can take it up at the other end.
Yeah, we can. I have, yeah.
We're not on one of those Zoom calls that shuts off after 40 minutes.
Yeah.
No.
Pay extra for the
Yeah. Another $3.
Everybody's muted except for the the speakers, right?
Correct.
We will be, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like watching the temperature go up, 114, 100.
Pretty severe temperature.
Right. Oh my God.
Frank Highlander.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Jill, it looks like it's hovering at 116.
Yeah, we're gonna start now. Why don't we start? I'll begin. Noah, I'm gonna start. So do you wanna,
I'm gonna mute everyone.
okay. Welcome, everybody, to this Jewish Battleground Coalition event with Bill Kristol. My name is Jill Zippin. I am chairperson of Democratic Jewish Outreach Pennsylvania. Thank you for being here today. I know there's a lot of Zooms you could be on, and we're happy you are on this Zoom. Jewish Battleground Coalition was formed when we realized that the Jewish vote in these key battleground states can make a difference in who wins this election. So we gathered together and are working together to make sure Jews turn out in these key states. The key battleground states of Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. We have hosted many events, and we are working together to turn out the vote, and we are thrilled today to have with us Bill Kristol. The event will be moderated by Martin Raffel and by Sam Edelman. Adam Kessler will introduce them as well as our speaker. Adam Kessler is the former head of the JCRC of Philadelphia and is a board member of Democratic Jewish Outreach Pennsylvania. So take it away, Adam.
Thanks, Jill. Welcome, everybody. The upcoming presidential election has us all living in fear of the possibility of another 4 years of Donald Trump, a man who not only has no business being president, but whose actions are slowly but surely degrading the civil and social norms in which all minority groups like ours depend upon to thrive. Those of us working in battleground states are driven to advocate for Joe Biden and the Jewish community by making sure we don't take any vote for granted. Our numbers are small, but our ability to determine the outcome in swing states is great. Despite favorable polls, and despite the almost daily outrages that come from Donald Trump, we have been concerned that too many of our friends, colleagues, and even some family members express hesitation about Joe Biden, mostly because of the prevailing myth that Trump may be better for Israel. They seem willing to forego all other issues of concern to us as Jews, most importantly, Jewish security, ignoring the rise of anti-Semitism during Trump's term and his role in encouraging it. This is not only misguided, given Joe Biden's 40-plus year track record of consistent support for Israel, it's dangerous to our community and to our country. We must address our one-issue brethren, and while we won't change the minds of some diehards, we believe many of these fence-sitters can be swayed by providing context, facts, and reasoned arguments. To help us make this case, we turn to a guest speaker not normally associated with a group of Democrats, which is precisely the point. We're living through a moment where normal discourse between Republicans and Democrats.
What are they doing after the election?
Pardon me. Make sure you're muted. Republicans and
The medicine. What?
Republicans and Democrats who have been hijacked by Trumpism, a populism driven by a kind of unlogic or reason distorted by suspicion and misinformation. William Kristol is a founding director of Defending Democracy Together, an educational and advocacy organization dedicated to defending American liberal democratic norms, principles, and institutions. Kristol has long been recognized as a leading participant in and analyst of American politics and has helped shape the national debate on issues ranging from American foreign policy to the meaning of American conservatism. Kristol was a founder of the Weekly Standard in 1995 and edited the influential magazine for over 2 decades. Before starting the Weekly Standard, Kristol led the Project for the Republican Future, where he helped develop the strategy that produced the 1994 Republican congressional victory. Before that, Mr. Kristol served in senior positions in the Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush administrations. Before coming to Washington, Mr. Kristol taught politics at the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard University. He received his undergraduate degree and his PhD from Harvard as well. Leading the discussion, we have 2 distinguished panelists who are members of our own Jewish Battleground Coalition. Martin Raffel, my friend and colleague, is retired as Senior Vice President of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, where he headed the Task Force on Israel, World Jewry, and International Human Rights, and he currently serves on the board of the DJOP with me. Dr. Sam Edelman is the former Executive Director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East and former head of the College of Arts and Sciences at the American Jewish University in Los Angeles. Sam works with Florida Dems Caucus of American Jews, which is also part of our Jewish Battleground Coalition. And before I pass this off, I will ask, I guess, the most obvious question on everybody's mind to Bill. Let's see if I can see you here. I guess you've been a stalwart conservative thinker, commentator, and writer for much of your illustrious career. What prompted your decision to divorce yourself from the Republican Party and the Trump presidency? What prompted your decision to endorse Joe Biden? In other words, what's a nice conservative guy like you doing in a liberal place like this?
Well, thanks, Adam and Jill, and I look forward to this conversation. I was going to say I've never seen so many Jewish Democrats in one place at one time, but that's not true, since I, in fact, spent most of my life being surrounded by Jewish Democrats and failing to persuade them to vote Republican, even when there was a reasonable case to do so. I think, you know, it's when I taught at Penn it was my first job, and I really loved living in Philadelphia. And I was thinking about, as you were reading the introduction, and I think many of you on this call are from Pennsylvania, and Adam, you're from Philadelphia, I believe. And I remember voting in Philadelphia, and I may have the year, I was there 78 to 83. So I voted for Reagan in 80. I voted for Dick Thornburgh, as I recall, in 82 for governor. And I think Arlen Specter, maybe for like DA or something like that. I can't even remember now. This was early, it's a long time ago. Makes us feel old, but yeah, that was a different Republican Party, right? And I have no, I'm not embarrassed to have been a Jewish Republican then, and thought the Jews should be open-minded about both parties. But no, I mean, Trump, it's all Donald Trump. He's really terrible for reasons I probably don't need to go into on this call. I mean, he really does threaten, I think, the basics of liberal democracy at home, the rule of law, our democratic norms and institutions, and American leadership in the world in ways that really are different, I think, from previous candidates of either party. So it was a pretty easy decision. I mean, I've been anti-Trump since the beginning. Some of my Republican friends couldn't, they were anti-Trump, but they couldn't quite cross the aisle for Biden. I didn't have any such problem, especially once Biden won the nomination. We actually tried to help him do that a little bit by getting some independents and Republicans to vote for Biden in Democratic primaries where that was legal, which it is in Virginia, for example, where I live. But honestly, I think we're lucky to have Joe Biden, from my point of view, to have Joe Biden as the Democratic candidate, both because I think he'll be a good president and because it's been easier I think it's a stronger candidate than some of the others would have been. And from my more parochial point of view, it's been easier to make the case to some disaffected Republicans and independents for Biden than it would have been, honestly, for some of the other candidates, leaving aside demerits almost, just the image of Sanders or Warren and so forth. So I have no problem being for Biden and being pretty enthusiastically for Biden. I helped run this Republican Voters Against Trump effort. Now, and that's a wide variety of people. We don't screen them really. I mean, we screen a few out just to make sure there are no crazy people in there. But we have, 800-900 of these videos up on our website, Republicans many of whom voted for Trump in 2016. Almost all of them are voting for Biden this time. A few of them are sort of saying, I'm just sitting it out. I can't vote for Biden. But some of them are very, and I think this is what gives it credibility, honestly. They're telling us what they believe. And some of them say, I'm awfully reluctant to come over and vote for Biden because of this issue or that issue, or my family's been Republican forever or whatever, but, I'm going to do it reluctantly. And I respect those people. And it's good to have that message, honestly, because there are X number of voters who you want to get the reluctant Biden voters, right? If you just get the enthusiastic Biden voters, you're only sticking at your 46, 47% probably. But I personally feel pretty enthusiastic, honestly, about Biden. I think it's a chance, from my point of view, to have a Democratic administration that could be, that will be pro-Israel, to take that parochial issue, but that generally is committed to American leadership in the world and to a reasonable set of domestic policies that I think could be very healthy for the country. So I'm happy to be with you on this at this moment.
So it's Martin Raffle here, Bill. Let me jump in. It might have been an easy decision for you to come out for Biden, but I, for one, if you come into my shul as a Republican for Biden, I will encourage the rabbi to give you shlishi. Because I think you are very much an important part of the coalition that will bring this to a successful conclusion. So surveys have generally shown that Israel is not an issue that ranks high on the list of priorities for Jewish voters. Yet, as Adam points out, anecdotally, we're constantly running into those who seem to remain on the fence in this election because of Israel, either out of concern about Biden and the Democrats, or because they believe Trump is uniquely good for Israel and therefore has earned our support as a result of that. There was a poll released just today by J Street, which shows that the Jewish community is overwhelmingly in support of Biden, 75% to 22% in Pennsylvania, 73% to 22% in Florida, very along the lines of the AJC poll, which showed 75% to 22% nationally. And yet, I drilled down a little bit. The one area where the gap between Biden and Trump is the smallest, it's still overwhelmingly for Biden, is in the area of foreign policy, where if, in terms of Israel, Biden is leading Trump by 56 to 35, on Iran by 60 to 30, and on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, 59 to 31. So with that as background, I wanted to pose a series of assertions that we tend to hear from the Israel fence sitters and get your reactions to them. It will help us shape the kinds of responses we provide to these Israel fence sitters. One assertion is that while Biden is a centrist and he has a long record of support for Israel, nevertheless, I fear that there is influence from the progressive wing of the party, which has been less friendly to Israel, and that influence will be borne out in a Biden administration. How do we respond to those who are afraid of the progressive wing of the party? That's number one. So I will go one by one.
Okay. So, I mean, it's obviously a very big question and a big discussion. I'll just make a couple of general points and then answer that one point. So for me, Israel is important, actually. I'm not one of those, it's fine to me if everyone can make up his own mind about what issues matter most to him or her, but I would have real problems, I'll put it this way. Despite Trump being an existential threat, it would be much harder for me to cross the line if I thought Biden were anti-Israel or weren't reasonably reliable on Israel. I say this as someone who opposed the Iran deal and who is not entirely where Biden is on every issue of US-Israel relations. But I think he's clearly from the center of the party, which is why you then people devolve to the, well, but how do we know he's not going to be pulled around by Ilhan Omar or AOC or Bernie Sanders, I suppose. And the easiest answer to that, honestly, is, well, he defeated them and there's no evidence that he's particularly interested. I mean, he's been sensible in reaching out to them and getting their support. And on some individual issues, economic issues, maybe he'll do a little more on the left for the sake of keeping the party together or because he's become convinced of it. But I don't believe there's any evidence that he has any inclination that way, really in foreign policy in general, or on Israel specifically. So I think it's become a conservative talking point that, oh, the left wing of the Democratic Party is just going to drag him along. I mean, he made a VP pick. I had slight preference for a couple of other people, but he picked Kamala Harris, who's good on Israel. I mean, just from a conventional, moderate, liberal, let's just say, point of view of the Democratic senators, she's always been one of the ones who, when they split on some various votes, she's always been more on the pro-Israel side. She visited Israel, I think, 2 or 3 times as a senator, and been active in California. If you talk to people from California, active in the pro-Israel, reasonably active in the pro-Israel community there. I didn't know much about her on this issue much. And I asked someone 4 or 5 months ago from California, I guess I wouldn't want this repeated. And I said, was she pretty good on Israel? And this friend told me a story with the upshot of which I won't bore you with the whole details was, we have one Jewish senator from California who actually is not particularly interested in Israel and has been not great from their point of view. And I'm not, maybe this person's being unfair, I don't know. But that's Dianne Feinstein. We have another who's not Jewish. And she's been excellent and very responsive. So Biden, Harris, and if you look at the senior foreign policy people, they're going to be mainstream Democrats on Israel. I'm a little more of a mainstream Republican on Israel, but I don't see honestly much to worry about. The other point I would make, I do think some of my liberal friends there's no point attacking. The Trump administration has been better on Israel than one might have expected, than other populist, nationalist, Trump-like administrations might have been. Some of that is because of just the personal accident of his son-in-law and daughter, whatever you think of them. I mean, it probably gives him a little more attachment. And he's from New York, which means he's not, he's known a lot of Jews over the years, and had, his lawyer became an ambassador to Israel. maybe you can argue about whether that was the right image to project in terms of being pro-Israel, but you can't say the guy's not pro-Israel, you know? So in some way, I think I can make a more sophisticated case that he's done damage in a certain way to the US-Israel relationship by making it so much about a kind of Trump-Netanyahu alliance as opposed to a broader US-Israel alliance. That's some of that's frankly more of a criticism probably of Netanyahu than of Trump, or criticism maybe too strong, but a concern. But anyway, I mean, I don't see much point in relitigating everything he's done. I supported moving the embassy, and I was annoyed when the Bush administration, which I was close to in many ways, didn't move the embassy to Jerusalem, for example. So there's no point, you know, sort of attacking everything they've done. The bottom line on that, though, is if the US isn't a reliable leader of the democratic world in general, if the US doesn't stand up for liberal democratic values in general, I don't have much confidence in the stability of the support for Israel, even if it might be okay in the temporary moment when he happens to have an Israeli prime minister he gets along with and has some particular relationships that make him okay on some very particular issues having to do with Israel. So I don't see much point in saying that Trump's been horrible or disastrous for Israel or whatever. I think you could even say we've been a little lucky maybe, but it's not a reliable basis going forward in American politics. And we would pay a huge price among younger Jews, especially, for the notion that to be pro-Israel is to be pro-Trump. I think there we're already paying a price. And I think it's here Bibi has made this worse, and others have made it, the pro-Israel part, the vociferously pro-Israel part and pro-Bibi part of the Jewish community have made this worse. And we need to reestablish, for the sake of the US-Israel relationship, the fact that it's a bipartisan matter to be pro-Israel. And in that respect, actually, I mean, honestly, just as a kind of social science almost matter or historical matter, having a pro-Israel Biden administration would be very healthy for the country. I mean, people here on this call probably had somewhat different views about Obama and his relationship with Israel. I think some of the right-wing criticism of him was way overstated. There's no question that he had, though, more of a self-understanding that he was going to correct a tilt that he saw in US policy in the past, that I think he had great hopes, and I don't begrudge him these hopes, in 2008, 2009, that he might see a Palestinian state founded on his watch. I think he would have said a peaceful and terrorist rejecting Palestinian state, but it wasn't, again, that's not a crazy thing to hope for. If you could have such a peaceful state, if there were a two-state solution, that would be a good thing. It didn't happen. He had some, I think, resentments, against an Israeli government that he thought was making that difficult. So I think with Obama, it was a little more complicated. I think, as I say, some of the criticism was overstated, but I would say, but Biden, I don't think it even has that. So I really don't see much grounds for worrying about Biden.
Okay, Bill, I'm just going to try to keep this within certain limits because I know there's many.
Yeah, no, I went. I'll be quicker.
Okay, so you mentioned Iran, and there are the fence sitters out there who say, the embassy in Jerusalem and the recognition of sovereignty in the Golan Heights, those were symbolic. I get that that's not really tied to Israeli security. You mentioned Iran, and you were not supportive of the deal. And to these fence sitters who say, I worry Biden's already pledged to go back into the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. That makes me nervous. How do you respond to that concern?
Makes me a little nervous, but he hasn't really pledged to go back into the JCPOA. I think he's pledged to try to negotiate a new version of it, which would be different, honestly, because it's 5 years later. And Trump's policies make me nervous because he hasn't slowed down the Iranian nuclear program. And we can't do it without our allies. Whatever you think of the JCPOA, it did have the allies on board. Sanctions don't work without the allies. And that's what Trump is now and Pompeo are now finding. So I'm not convinced that Trump's Iran policy, I think there was too much hysteria on the left when we got out of the JCPOA. I think, to be truthful, if you look at the whole thing, it's sort of hard to see that it made much difference one way or the other in weakening Iran or strengthening Iran, our allies. But I think going forward, we need to be in working with our allies on Iran.
Okay. Another concern we hear from the Israel fence sitters is that, Trump has broadened the Israeli-Arab lens to now bring about greater rapprochement between Israel and some of the Arab nations, particularly in the Gulf, and has put the Palestinian leadership in its place and has not focused on the Palestinian issue to the degree that the Obama administration did. And the thought is that Biden will return to a Palestinian-centric foreign policy and move away from this broader lens that the Trump administration seems to have promoted. How do you respond to that concern?
Again, I have no problem with the peace deal with the UAE and Bahrain, and I'm not sure if another administration could have pulled it off or not. But again, Biden's not going to repudiate those. The big picture is, the threats to Israel remain. I think and therefore the U.S. relationship remains so important. And I guess I would come back, therefore, to the slightly bigger picture. If you believe in those deals, you know what? The best thing that can happen is to have a Democratic administration move forward on their basis. To the degree this becomes a Trump agenda that the left in the U.S. repudiates, and the left around the world for that matter, that's not a good thing for Israel either. So again, I don't think we need to begrudge. It may be that Trump, some semi-accidentally, frankly, stumbled into a couple of good aspects to good outcomes in the Middle East. Ultimately, how much difference these deals with UAE and Bahrain make is another question.
Mm-hmm. So my final question to you is on the issue of BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions. So there have been a number of legislative initiatives to ban BDS, which many in the Jewish community feel is equivalent to anti-Semitism. And if those BDSers who don't support the legitimacy of Israel, in essence, they're taking an anti-Semitic point of view. Republicans seem to be, they argue, absolutely against this, while Democrats are opposed to it in principle, but they also are reluctant to ban it on civil liberties grounds, that it really is First Amendment free speech. So for those who have that concern, how would you respond to that?
Look, I don't even know what banning in some ways BDS means. I mean, obviously individuals can advocate for it. Obviously an individual company, not-for-profit, for-profit, can choose not to invest in Israel. We can't force people to do that. Obviously, people can tell other people they shouldn't invest in Israel. I'm not for that, but I mean, they can do that. That is free speech and freedom of your own, controlling your own capital, to be honest. So, and your own trade relationships. I don't think I'm sympathetic. So obviously it gets complicated when you have public institutions and the pension funds of states and state universities. And I'm against those institutions pursuing BDS policies. And I would fight that very hard mostly at the state and local level, honestly. I'm not sure how much of a federal role there is there. But again, ultimately, has Trump damaged the BDS movement on college campuses? I'm doubtful about that, because again, if the face of being against BDS is to be pro-Trump, that's going to hurt us with younger Jews, with younger Americans who, haven't thought about it that much and are open, unfortunately, to some anti-Israel sentiments and propaganda that's being pushed hard. So I'm for fighting BDS aggressively. I think we're honestly better off doing that with a broad coalition that supports Israel and opposes BDS at all levels, state, local, private, public, and does so in ways that are consistent with American constitutional law and with American values. And so the overreach on BDS, if anything, I think has been and the kind of almost sole focus on it, as if that's the hugest threat right now. It's probably done a little bit it's been a mistake, I would just say, for parts of the pro-Israel community. Anyway, Joe Biden's not for BDS, and Kamala Harris wasn't pro BDS when she was Attorney General of California, and could have, I suppose, weighed in on it for the California Pension Fund. And Nancy Pelosi isn't pro BDS, and Chuck Schumer isn't pro BDS. I mean, the whole rhetoric, I'll just say 30 seconds on this, of the right about the Democratic Party is a little crazy. I mean, where are these anti-Israel Democrats in positions of power? Bob Menendez, who's going to chair the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, or I mean, there are individuals who I think are a problem. There are others who are not quite where I am on some of these issues. But the notion that the Biden administration, or Biden, whether a Democratic Senate and Democratic House, is going to just be launching on a kind of big anti-Israel agenda is a little ridiculous, really.
Good. Thank you, Bill. Very, very helpful. I'm now going to hand the baton over to my colleague, Sam Edelman, who's going to move into a new territory.
Okay.
Thank you, Martin. Bill, it's a pleasure to be here with you. I've been reading your writings for many, many years. In spite of the fact that I'm a liberal Democrat, I enjoy your intellectual vision of the world, and sometimes I oppose it, and sometimes I say, okay. I'm going to start off on a question on the issue of Jewish security and anti-Semitism. And one of the first questions I want to ask you, the Trump years have seen an exceptionally large rise in anti-Semitic hate crimes, including the mass murder at the synagogues in Pittsburgh and Poway, and the Jewish market in New Jersey, and attacks in New York, et cetera, all leading to death. What do you attribute these attacks and the rise of overt anti-Semitism?
I mean, I'm not sure. Obviously, it's a huge country. You can get individual attacks that are just crazy people or anti-Semites who become anti-Semites because they read certain things online or whatever. But I do think generally a politics that encourages divisiveness, intolerance, that gives voice to hatreds, that encourages people to kind of believe in conspiracy theories and act on their belief and carry guns and so forth, is not a healthy politics for Jews. So I would tie the rise of anti-Semitic hate crimes to the rise of hate crimes generally. You know, I was talking with Olivia Troy, as a young woman who did her best on the coronavirus task force and joined Republican voters against Trump, who's from El Paso, whose mother lives there still. Her mother's Mexican. She lives very close, actually, her mother, to the Walmart that was shot up there. And we were talking about this and the degree to which, you know, it's not, you don't need to say something anti-Jewish here or anti-Hispanic there I mean, that can happen to cause a particular crime, right? But if you have a climate in which people, especially white supremacist types and white Christian supremacist types think it's okay to hate your fellow citizens and then to act on that hatred, that's not good for Jews.
You know, given the explosion of anti-Semitism over the last 4 years, how do you think a Biden administration will deal with it versus how the Trump administration has dealt with it?
You know, I think they will appropriately use federal law enforcement authorities and DHS and in better ways, frankly, to deal with it. I mean, look at the way Trump has used the parts of the federal government that are supposed to be concerned with this. But again, I would broaden the lens from anti-Semitism to hatred and hostility to minority groups of all sorts, really. And I think it's healthier for Jews to have a country which is a tolerant country. I mean, look at Washington's letter to the Newport, to the Torah congregation in Newport. It's about a country in which people have rights, not just because the government decides to give them rights, or not just because someone decides that they like Jews more than other people, which is sort of the way Trump occasionally talks, but because everyone has these basic rights to live in peace and to practice their religion and to be who they want to be in terms of their, and who they are in terms of their ethnic background and so forth. So I think a Biden America will be a healthier America, happier America for an awful lot of minority groups.
Last question in this area, and then we'll move on to the next one. Do you think, does the current state of civil unrest in the US and the political divide that we've seen in the last few years, especially now in this current election, pose a threat to the Jewish community's security? And what's your feeling about how the Jewish community should respond to these concerns?
I think it's very worrisome for Jews. It's worrisome for many other Americans, as I've been saying. And I think the response is to elect Biden, honestly. I mean, obviously there are particular responses that someone mentioned a synagogue. We belong here in Northern Virginia, and we've spent a fair amount of money on the precautions, unfortunately, against attacks and so forth. And my wife actually is now chairman of the Northern Virginia Jewish Community Center, which is, the worst, the worst title in the Jewish communal organizations is current president. The best title is immediate past president. So she's dealing with a lot of pandemic related headaches there, obviously, since they have a preschool and all kinds of things. But, there too, they have serious security issues, which they've had to step up in light of what happened in Pittsburgh and elsewhere. So I think the community needs to be prudent, but honestly, we can defend. We're luckily a wealthy community and a politically active community. We could probably defend ourselves better than a lot of other people can, even though we're small. But you don't want to live in a country where you're just endlessly having to worry about, what new high-tech defenses do we need for all of our communal organizations.
Exactly. Thank you. Let's go move on to the next area that we wanted to address, and that's the area of American democracy and the election specifically. So my first question to you is, despite the efforts of Republicans like you and groups like yours and the Lincoln Project and a number of other organizations, the vast majority of Republican base has remained loyal to Trump for the last 4 years, along with many in Congress and many in state government. Why do you think that is? Where do conservatives such as yourself see your political future if Biden wins? And what does the future of your party look like?
Those are all big questions, so I'll just be brief. And no, I've been a little surprised at I've been quite surprised at how much everyone has gone along. I mean, I think one way to think of it is this way. You know, in a multi-candidate primary, a demagogue can win. Maybe the conditions were there, were ripe, maybe on the conservative side, on the Republican side, but he also got lucky in many ways, Trump, in terms of Jeb Bush being not the right candidate for 2016 and other things. In a general election between two parties, a candidate who shouldn't win can win if the other candidate has a fair amount of baggage, fairly or unfairly, and you get lucky in the Electoral College, and Russia helps you, and Jim Comey helps you, and whatever. So Trump squeaks out a victory. And those things are not, I mean, they're problematic, but for me, they're not, it could happen. It can happen once a generation or once in 50 years, and the country will chug along after 40, recovers. For me, the reason Trump has become such a threat, and the reason a second term is such an unacceptable threat, is the capitulation of Republican elected officials to Trump and of conservative elites, both business and intellectual elites, to Trump, which has totally enabled him to do so much more than he might have done. I mean, do the thought experiment sometime of what does it look like if he wins, but a lot of Republican members of Congress say, no, we can't do that. And a lot of the Wall Street Journal editorial page says, no way, in terms of a lot of the rhetoric, and not just slapping him on the wrist, but saying, seriously, if we don't stop this, we'll look for a challenger in the primaries, or maybe we'll support impeachment when you do something that deserves impeachment. And what if the business communities had shut off the Republican Party for going along with Trump in 2018 or in 2020? I mean, I think that enabling, that rationalizing, has really been very important, very damaging, and very disappointing. And that I wouldn't entirely have expected that, honestly. I know a lot of those people. I don't know, honestly, the simple answer. I mean, it's very easy to rationalize things in a lot of different ways. Power is attractive, and you think you're doing good by going along, and it's too difficult politically, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't really accept those excuses. I would say among never Trump Republicans, therefore, there are different points of view, honestly. Some of my good friends hope to save the Republican Party. That would be a good thing. It'd be healthy, good for this country if we had Dick Thornburg, Ronald Reagan Republican Party, and they're not entirely the same themselves, those two, obviously. But I'm not as confident about that as some other people. So I don't know quite where I personally might end up, and I'm not sure where people like me will end up. I'm a little pessimistic about the Republican Party just because, the base is, Trump's been president for 4 years. He's encouraged all these elements. It's a little harder to just overcome it quickly. The British Labour Party looks to me like it's moving pretty quickly away from Corbyn. I don't follow it that closely, but and you can imagine that, we'll have a Labour Party back to the kind we would want to have, frankly, quickly. Maybe we do already. But Corbyn never became prime minister. So with Trump, it's a different story. But I don't know what will happen in the 2022 Pennsylvania Republican primary for Toomey's seat. That would be a good case study, I would say. I mean, will we have even a Toomey-like Republican, let alone a Thornburg-like Republican, win that? Or will the Trumpier candidate win that? Even if Trump loses badly this time, I'm not so sure that answer is one that I'm going to be happy with. I think it's better if he loses badly, incidentally, than if he loses a close race. But even so, I'm not super confident about the Republicans.
Well, let's continue there. Go a little further. What are the various ways the Trump presidency has and is threatening our country and democratic institutions? And has the Republican Party under Trump moved dangerously close to both authoritarianism and maybe even fascism, similar to what's been going on in a number of conservative movements in Europe?
No, it's been bad. I mean, it's hard to disentangle in a way some people screaming enthusiastically about things Trump says, and a lot of others murmuring quietly, well, I wish he wouldn't say it that way, but still going along. For me, though, look, the base, as it's called, is a problem. But we shouldn't be that surprised that people can get whipped up, and a president who's a pretty successful demagogue can whip them up, and it's not good. I don't mean to minimize it, but it's, I guess I'm less surprised intellectually when I look at a crowd. I am somewhat surprised, I gotta admit, when I look at a crowd cheering Trump the way they do. But, if you've read the history of democracy, the history of crowds, the history of politics, you expect maybe that kind of thing unfortunately can happen, especially when in tough times and so forth. It's the elites for me that have been really the worst, the most disappointing. I mean, I'll mention this. The Wall Street Journal, my father wrote for the Wall Street Journal for decades, one column a month. He wasn't on staff, but he was pleased to be part of that editor op-ed page. I've been friends with theirs forever. The Weekly Standard was kind of a friendly competitor, not really a competitor, a compliment maybe to the Wall Street Journal editorial page. We were always less dogmatic, honestly, and less, I think, a little more open-minded about politics. But they were our allies and they were our friends. And many people went from the Standard to the Journal editorial page, and the other way. David Brooks came to the beginning of the Weekly Standard, came to join us from the Wall Street Journal editorial page. I mean, when I read the Wall Street Journal editorial page now, I really can't believe it. I just happened to read one editorial today trying to make a big deal about Hunter Biden getting paid, apparently, maybe getting paid some money, or maybe more like an investment in a fund by some Chinese bank in 2017. I mean, are the Chinese capable of deciding Hunter Biden is the son of a former vice president? We should invest there a little more easily than they'll invest with any of us? Sure. I mean, is that a new thing in life, in international politics? No. But I was just thinking about it for a minute. 2017, Trump was president. The Republicans controlled Congress. Like, what exactly were they buying from Hunter Biden or Joe Biden? They didn't have a heck of a lot of influence on the Republican Congress or on the Trump administration, So is it like the Japanese, frankly, paying Ronald Reagan $1 billion to give speeches after he was president, kind of a way of buying some general goodwill in certain circles? Maybe. But is it like something to really get super alarmed about? Is this worthy of a Wall Street Journal editorial today? Chastising Joe Biden for something there's no crime is alleged. His involvement isn't at all clear at all. I mean, really at all. He never seems to have gotten a cent from any of this. So it's really terrible that the Journal editorial page has gone to this level. And I do think the elites play there's been just a little too much focus on the base in a funny way. The elites have played a big role in going along with this and sort of legitimating it. And I just know, I'm sure you all do this, and know people like this. I know businessmen, I know academics, they don't follow politics very closely. If you're on the conservative side, the Journal editorial page has kind of been where you looked for guidance. You don't have time to follow these complicated scandals or complicated policy sometimes. So you figure, okay, the Journal will give us kind of a sense of where we should be on this. And in that respect, the elite rationalizing of Trump has been very damaging. Everyone focuses on Fox News and Tucker Carlson and all that, but I'd say the Journal editorial page, the more upscale sort of defenders of Trump at the local level, the business types who just were never willing to really denounce him, they've done a lot of damage too.
Yeah, well, we have to remember too that the Wall Street Journal is also a part of the Murdoch group. So
totally. Yeah,
they seem to be cut from the same mold. This was the question I was going to ask last, but I decided I'm going to move it to now because I want to make sure we get it in. Even if Trump loses the election and leaves the White House, he'll likely remain a public figure and will be able to continue spreading his lies, uninformed opinions, conspiracy claims, etc., on Fox, on OAN, on Breitbart, and maybe his own network. Is this a fight for life that we're in?
Well, it's a fight in the sense that it's not going to end on November 3rd or on January 20th. He'll be weaker if he's not president, obviously. And it's just hard to know. I don't really know. We've had demagogues in the past. We've had irresponsible newspapers, radio shows, to some degree, TV networks. We've had irresponsible politicians, senators, governors, Joe McCarthy, et cetera. The power of the presidency to amplify the irresponsibility and the recklessness and the danger shouldn't be underestimated. I mean, I do think the fact that Trump has been president is a large part of the problem, but it's not the whole problem. And he will be here. And this is where it gets to how influential will he be in the Republican Party? And that, a lot of that is a leadership question. I mean, a lot of that is from the base, and we'll see what happens in the 2022 primaries and so forth. But I don't know, what do Republican leaders on the Hill say? And it's, you know, a lot of them will want to just move on. You know, they'll kind of, that was kind of a crazy 4 years. But now let's get back to business and let's oppose Biden on this or that. For me, that's not enough. I mean, I really think that would not be enough for the country and for the sake of the Republican Party and the conservative movement. They need to, they don't need to persecute everyone who's ever been friendly to Trump, but they need to make clear that it's a break, that it's a repudiation almost of these 4 years. I don't have that much confidence they'll do that. I hope they do. I think everyone should encourage Republicans, and they know, and Republican donors and influential people they know, to push for a cleaner break with Trump and Trumpism. Again, which doesn't mean they have to sound like me, but they should at least sound, they shouldn't sort of pretend that this was all fine. And I think a lot of how people treat that, though, will affect how important Trump is in a year or 2 or 3. I have friends, and this is just an analytical question, and we don't know. We really haven't had the Trump experience before, or the post-Trump experience, obviously, before. I have friends who think, nah, once he loses, a lot of the air goes out of the balloon, and then he's around for a year or 2 or 3, and people get a little sick of it. And by 2023, who cares what ex-President Trump or Donald Trump Jr. is saying to 400 people at some event somewhere? You know, it's sort of, I don't know, Sarah Palin. You can think of a lot of other people whose star dimmed very, very fast, you know. On the other hand, Pat Buchanan might even be a case for that, though he, in a way, led to Trump later. So, but I don't know. Trump's different. He's the former president, you know, and so I worry that he certainly is going to try to stay around. And I don't think we can just say, okay, that was great. Now we can forget about all the intolerance and illiberalism on the right, some of it on the left as well, of course.
Well, we're almost out of time on this part, but I want to squeeze the last question in because I also think it's important. A big part of Trump's agenda for the election has involved the conspiracy theories he spread, the voter suppression tactics, the possibility he'll contest the election results if he loses. To what extent might we be facing a crisis if he loses his bid for re-election?
I mean, I think we'll face more of a crisis the closer it is, and it's not clear that he's lost. I mean, I think if he loses Florida and maybe North Carolina or Ohio on election night, or even if Pennsylvania is +6 the way it looks now, I mean, that's not going to be close enough to really challenge. I think the governors will act appropriately. Even Republican state legislators will decide they're not going to die on that hill, you know, of trying to pretend that it's they should send Republican electors and so forth. So it would be much better to have a decisive victory. I was part of this group that tried to play out in a kind of game, in a simulation, what might happen in a close election. And that can get pretty scary in terms of both kind of violence in the streets. I mean, Trump goes on TV, they're stealing the election right now in Harrisburg and Philadelphia City Hall. They're fake, there's fake mail-in ballots. You need to go there and demonstrate. And if, I don't know if Pennsylvania is an open carry state, probably not, but and take your weapons with you. And, you know, I mean, that can get very, very ugly, obviously. I think it's unlikely to work. I mean, it's lucky that a lot of the states honestly have Democratic governors, and others have Democratic officials at the state level, and some Republican officials, to be fair, who aren't going to go along with that. And so I'm pretty optimistic that we're not going to face a worst case there. But I mean, the closer it is, the more dangerous the situation is.
Bill, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Your answers have been great. And I'm turning it back over to Jill and Adam.
Thank you. This was so interesting. We have some questions from people in the audience. Some were submitted in advance. And this goes along, actually, this question with what we've been discussing. In order to have a functioning democracy, we really do need a two-party system. And do you see the GOP as being able to rebuild itself? So once again, it can participate in a reasonable, rational way? Because a one-party system does not work. We benefit best when we govern from the center and when there's a good exchange of real policy ideas. So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I agree. I hope we have a reasonable Republican Party. I think it might take a while to get there. I'm also open to the proposition that we've had a sort of two-party system here for a long time, but it's not in the Constitution, obviously. you could imagine things changing. You could imagine a new centrist party or different things happening in different states, depending on the voting mechanisms of those states to some degree, if you had ranked choice voting and stuff. So I'm a little open to the proposition that things could change more than we're used to. You could have a Trumpy party, you could have a centrist party. The Democrats, incidentally, could split on some things. So I think we need a strong centrist bloc, whether it's whether it dominates the Republican Party or at least can work with a Democratic centrist on a lot of issues is another question. We can't control the big future in a sense. I mean, who knows how that really plays out over 4 or 8 or 12 years. But I think at the local and state level, I want to take Pennsylvania since I've mentioned it, and since I think a lot of you are from there. I mean, it's kind of important what happens in 2022 in Pennsylvania on the Republican side. It's not unimportant what's happening this year, obviously, in some of the congressional races as well as this presidential race. And look, I don't know how much we can control that. There'll be a primary and someone's going to win, and most people on this call are voting in the Republican primary anyway. But and I guess the character of the Democratic opponent would matter too. But that's sort of, you can imagine very different futures if some of these primary elections go one way or the other. So I'm not saying that it would be nice to have a healthy Republican Party. Doesn't produce it. And we have to work with whatever we can work with. And it might be that we, think of FDR. I mean, you might end up with a de facto kind of one party system for 4 or 8 or 12 years. It's not the end of the world. There'll be opposition within that party then. That's how the system would compensate. Ultimately, it would be good to have a healthy Republican Party.
One of the things that we talked about was what would happen if Trump hopefully loses post-election. But one of the things you've seen a more overt rise in hatred and vitriol, particularly from the right. People feel more open about engaging in hate speech. Do you think that this general vitriol will remain even if Biden wins and Trump is no longer in office?
I mean, it's a good question, and I some of it will, obviously, and there will be people who will try to keep it going. I think it's hard to know. I don't really feel like, I'm sure we each have our own kind of just vague sense of this, but how much of this is due to Trump? How much of it is not due to Trump's little straw? How much of it is really magnified by Trump being president and engaging in it and legitimizing it? Some of it's going to continue no matter what, obviously, right? But I do kind of think that there's an opportunity when he leaves to really begin to marginalize a fair amount of it, and that his being president has done an awful lot of damage. I guess that's my instinct, is to think that there's just nothing like the presidency. I mean, there's, to sort of amplify a certain message. And conversely, even a president that we may not like, you may not like on this call, I may not like a lot of the policies. But if his general message is treat your opponents respectfully, make sure we're peaceful, repudiate hatred on all sides, that can go a long way, I think, to calming things down. But but then there'll be Trump out there and others out there on different TV and radio networks and so forth, trying to whip things up. So it's not going to be just snap our fingers and it all goes away.
Someone asked, do you believe, is it Trump is not a conservative, or it is his behavior that you are opposed to? In other words, Trump, even before he ran, was all over the place on a variety of issues, and people say he's a Trumpist, not a conservative. So what current Trump policies run counter to your conservative philosophy? And what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I would have opposed Trump anyway for the nomination, just because there are others who are closer to where I am on policy issues, trade and other, particularly foreign policy, I would say. But I think for me, the decisive thing was the character and the type of appeals he was willing to make, the demagoguery and so forth. It's not unrelated because, if you're a limited government conservative, it's a little hard to be too much of a demagogue. I mean, you can't be on some issues, but because you're not really going to promise the government's going to do that much for you, because your whole point is government should stay out of economic decisions. And so you're not going to hopefully have crony capitalism and other such things. Obviously, you can have versions of demagoguery and different policy combined with different policy views. Trump's version of nationalist populism, nativism, is particularly susceptible to demagoguery. But again, if someone had said, you know what, I think we need to renegotiate trade deals with China, we need to be tougher on, I'm not so sure the free trade framework's working well, or even NAFTA is a bad idea. I mean, I would have disagreed with some of that, not all of it actually, but I wouldn't have, been so adamant about Trump being unsuited for the presidency. So it was more character and demagoguery than the policies. Some of these policies do need to be rethought, obviously, on left and right. I think that's a bit of an opportunity in the next few years. One damage that Trump has done is he's made it impossible to have a serious policy debate about anything, since it's all about Trump and his insanity. We do need to have like an actual policy debate about what do we do about big tech? I mean, are we happy with the current situation with Facebook and Google and so forth? It's problematic. I'm not sure that the solutions couldn't make it worse. So that's also something but that's a kind of classic public policy debate. We had it many times in American history when new technologies showed up. Foreign policy, China, those are real issues, obviously. The Middle East, I mean, I don't need to mention all of them. Economic inequality, equal opportunity, education policy. It's been very hard to even have a serious debate about much of this in the Trump years. That would be a healthy thing. If Biden may himself not be the most innovative president, and he may mostly just preside over a sort of, hopefully, a kind of calming down. But at the congressional level, at the state level, one can imagine younger politicians actually engaging in a constructive debates on some of these issues. And I would say, incidentally, on some of these issues, you could easily imagine centrist alternatives, bipartisan alternatives arising. I'm not sure what the liberal position right now, or the conservative position even, is on Facebook and privacy and algorithms and how it should be regulated and by whom. I mean, that's a pretty complicated issue which cuts across these lines. I'd say the same is true of some of the foreign policy issues, China. So maybe there'll be a healthier public policy debate after Trump.
We have time for one more question. If the Republican Party cannot be remade, would you favor starting a real third party in America? And is that something that's even possible today?
I'd be very open to it. I mean, maybe we could also just save the Democratic Party and have a Scoop Jackson Democratic Party again, but maybe that's not going to happen. I think it's not as impossible as people think, I guess is the way I would put it. I mean, there's a lot in the American system and in American history that is biased towards a two-party system. But when you really look at things like campaign finance, ballot access even, it's not as impossible to imagine as people might think that things could change pretty dramatically, that third parties or independent candidates could take off. You'd require the right combination of things, a Trumpy Republican Party, a Democratic Party that goes left. I think there would be a lot of room in the middle then. Now, right now, the Democratic Party hasn't gone left. And so, hopefully it won't. So that would make it harder, I'd say. And hopefully the Republican Party won't go Trumpy. But I can imagine such this thing, and maybe that would be the right thing to do. For now, the way I've been thinking about it is we need to have, and it doesn't have to be a formal thing, but informal and formal centrist alliances. They could be issue specific, incidentally. They don't need to be like, let's have a whole centrist thing that we all agree on with 18 different platform planks. But on particular issues, well, Israel, to take an obvious one, and I mean, one can be critical of AIPAC in many ways over many years. They're all friends of mine, and I've also had many arguments with them. But that the idea of AIPAC, which is, we can be pro-Israel and we can be Democrats and we can be Republicans and we can be a little more dovish and a little more hawkish, but let's try to have something that embodies a kind of consensus. That's not a stupid idea. Maybe they didn't do it quite right in every case. You could imagine that in other issue areas. So I'm very much interested in kind of centrist efforts, even if it's not clear that that's exactly a centrist third party.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Bill, for being here. This was so interesting. I could talk to you for another hour, but we can't.
Right.
So first of all, I want to thank my
Thank you.
Jewish Battleground partner coalitions for helping organize this call and for all the attendees. We hope to have future events. Hopefully we can have a post-election wrap up with a Biden win. I would like to thank Martin Raffel and Sam Edelman for the really interesting questions that were posed to you. I would like to as well thank Adam Kessler for reaching out to you, and to Doug Kahn, the director of the JCRC in San Francisco, and help engaging you. And we're thrilled, just really thrilled that you were here. This was interesting, informative, and actually positive and uplifting in some ways.
Okay, well, that's.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Be well, all of you.
Thank you. Be well, everyone. Have a good afternoon. Thank you again. Bye-bye.